more able to embrace a sense of community now or later? It'll be the same, actually. I'm guessing. Both, and it'll be just as it was the same thousands of years ago. I mean, the stuff that really counts, I think, is immediate.
Right. Okay.
And not spiritually evolved, or any such terminology.
Jonathan, what do you think about what James was saying in terms of neuroscience being able to explain a lot of these spiritual experiences? If not now, then certainly eventually with more research. Because I know you've made some videos where you said that there's some sort of awareness that precedes the brain itself. You want to explain what leads you to say that?
Sure. The neurological science can tell us about the reactions in the brain, and it can tell us what is perceived, but it doesn't say much about what's doing the perceiving, especially when you start talking about meaning and realize that awareness has this connection with meaning. And it's not just memories, but it's an understanding of memories' relationship with each other. You suddenly turn it into this non-physical thing. When you think of, like, when you're aware of the idea of a chair, it's not a memory, but it's rather a bunch of memories that have a meaningful connection to them. And in that, I could totally be wrong, and they'll tomorrow find the little node or nub or whatever in the brain next to the pineal gland or wherever that explains everything I would make that I would say on that regard. But I think we're dealing with something different in category, and I might be wrong. I really might be wrong. But it would seem to me that, like, awareness of what the brain does has to be separate from what the brain does.
Interesting.
For it to make sense. Otherwise, there is no reason. Like, if you were to set up a domino chain and flip it and flip the first domino and have that represent neurology, the domino chain doesn't need to be aware of itself in order to have that carry out. It doesn't matter how complicated the domino chain is. And that's kind of like the argument that I make often. And I don't know, James, I can't remember if we talked about that in your stick on that one night or what. So I'd love to hear.
Yeah.
Any reaction? Any at all?
My reading on consciousness currently is very low level.
Mine's less.
I think that once you have a capacity to have memories, then a lot of these things follow. The ability to create conceptual scenarios or even conceptual objects is not very far removed from that. My understanding and what I hold to is that consciousness is really an emergent property of brain function. In that we have all of these different things that go on in processing different types of information, and these run very much in the same way as virtual machines do on a computer or something like that. And they all give rise to these different epiphenomenological experiences, and once you have a memory that can hold and process these things in a certain way, suddenly you have an identity and you have, a consciousness.
I mean, what do you think about Jonathan's point, though, that all of Darwinian selection and biological evolution could have taken place in a completely mechanical way, sort of like dominoes falling over, in the complete absence of any awareness or experience or consciousness? So why should the physical, mechanical, causal relations between neurons and various chemicals give rise to experience, if experience, in fact, is entirely superfluous and epiphenomenal even?
At what level of complexity needs to be demonstrated for us to call it consciousness? I'm curious, Jonathan. You say these fabulous, we could have, in theory, a very complex set of dominoes to be set up and therefore set in motion, this deterministic motion. But how complex does it need to be? So I think, if I understand you, there's just something that we're not getting, another formula outside of this whole issue that we are shining our spotlight on, and that is where consciousness and God lies. Is that, am I understanding you correct?
Yes.
Yeah, for Jonathan. Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Yes. That's the idea. That's the idea. My only response to the emergent property thing, I don't want to let this slip away. An emergent property is only meaningful if something that is separate from the emergent property being considered is... No, I didn't say that right. What am I saying? You can only recognize an emergent property if the thing doing the recognizing is not that which you are recognizing.
Okay.
You have to say that, like, the emergent property is somehow aware of itself. If you can demonstrate that in any other... Ooh, hello.
It's all good. Sorry about that.
All right, all right.
My phone.
Okay. It's all right. I'm sorry. Shit. What was I saying? James,
You're talking about objectifying.
Emergent property doesn't make sense unless...
Emergent... Oh, yeah. Okay. Right. The attempt to explain away awareness as an emergent property doesn't really satisfy the problem that I would pose, that is awareness in the first place. And that's because an emergent property, what is... Actually, maybe we can discover it that way. It's like, what is an emergent property?
Well, we're talking about consciousness right here. So is consciousness an emergent property?
It won't be the same. If you're saying that awareness is just an emergent property, emergent...
No, I'm questioning. I'm not saying it
to
is.
what?
I'm questioning with you. I'm not like making a claim.
Well, usually when we use this word emergence in systems theory, say it's when the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Oh.
Basically. But I think in terms of consciousness...
Well, see, that's not going to help James.
No, I don't think it would.
That's not what James wants to say.
Right.
No, well, I think in a way it would be, the brain is processing all of these different sorts of experiences in very localized ways that all happen to be taking place within a very close-knit community, and they communicate with one another. And, as a result of this communication and the processing taking place in various locations and the function of memory within the brain, that once you add all of those things together, then the sum of the parts is greater.
But James, are you saying if you're saying neurons communicate with one another, are they already aware in some minuscule way before what we call human consciousness emerges through their communication?
I think this gets in first order and second order conscious experience.
Yeah.
There is the experience of a thing, which is first order, and then there's me telling you about my experience of a thing, which is second order. I think that it's getting into that area of the discussion that I'm not really very well read on, so I would have to defer expertise.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, I guess what's arising here in this the course of this conversation is that there's a link between consciousness and the necessity of God to explain the existence of the physical universe. Because the physical universe is, I think, self-evidently more than physical because we're conscious of it. Now, in attempting to explain consciousness via emergence, I think we're trying to say, well, no, consciousness is just a natural function of a complex physical system. But if emergence doesn't account for consciousness, because consciousness is somehow more than, it's not just that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. It's that somehow either neurons are already aware, or that human consciousness is somehow non-physical. And I've made a lot of videos about pan-experientialism, which is the idea that basically, yes, neurons are already aware. In fact, the molecules which they are aware of, which they are made of, are also very, in an even more primitive way, aware. And all the way down to atoms and quarks and whatever energy there is, it's aware in some way. I don't know that Jonathan subscribes to that sort of a perspective, but I'm wondering, what is the connection that you see between God and consciousness? And hopefully you can try to work in the physical world as well. Like, when does consciousness emerge in the physical world, or is the physical world always already intimately tied to awareness in some way from the beginning?
I don't think, well, okay, if I'm going to say that awareness is separate from the brain, then I have to also necessarily say that awareness does not need the brain to exist.